London, 1671. The Tower of London stands as it has for 6 centuries, a fortress of stone and shadow where England's darkest secrets sleep behind iron and guard. Within its ancient walls, past the yeoman warders and their ceremonial halberds, past the ravens that circle its parapets like omens, lies a room that holds the very soul of the English monarchy, the Jewel House, a cramped, poorly lit chamber in the Martin Tower, where the crown jewels rest behind a simple metal grille, treasures worth a king's ransom guarded by little more than an elderly man and his wife. The security seems almost insulting in its simplicity. No elaborate vault, no army of sentries. Just Talbot Edwards, 77 years old, master of the Jewel House, keeper of crowns that have touched the heads of monarchs for generations. But this is the way it's always been done. Tradition, ceremony, the unshakable British belief that some things are simply too sacred to steal. Colonel Thomas Blood is about to prove them catastrophically wrong. On a spring morning in April 1671, an elderly parson arrives at the tower with a young woman on his arm. His clerical collar marks him as a man of God. His demeanor radiates warmth and respectability. He speaks with an Irish lilt, requests a viewing of the crown jewels, like countless tourists before him. Talbot Edwards, always pleased to have company in his isolated post, welcomes them eagerly. He's a gregarious man, this keeper of England's treasures, lonely in his prestigious position, delighted to have visitors who appreciate his stories. The parson introduces himself as Dr. Ailiff. His companion, he explains, is his wife. They marvel appropriately at the regalia. The St. Edward's crown with its purple velvet cap and ermine trim, the sovereign's orb gleaming with its cross of pearls and precious stones, the scepter with its magnificent Cullinan diamond that won't be added for another 2 centuries, but whose predecessor still catches the light like captured starlight. Mrs. Ailiff seems overwhelmed by the splendor, perhaps too overwhelmed. Halfway through the viewing, she clutches her stomach, her face paling. She's taken ill, she gasps. The vapors, perhaps. The excitement. Could she possibly rest for a moment? Talbot Edwards springs into action with the hospitality of a man who sees few visitors. He and his wife, Margaret, usher the distressed woman upstairs to their private apartments. They offer her wine, spirits of hartshorn, whatever comfort they can provide. The crisis passes. Mrs. Ailiff recovers her color, expresses profound gratitude for their kindness. Dr. Ailiff is moved nearly to tears by such Christian charity from strangers. Before they depart, the parson presses something into Edwards's hand. A small gift, he insists, for their trouble. And perhaps, his eyes twinkle with genuine-seeming warmth, perhaps they might meet again? He and his wife have so enjoyed the company. In fact, Dr. Ailiff mentions, he knows a young gentleman, recently arrived from the country, who might make an excellent match for the Edwards' daughter. Would they consider an introduction? Talbot Edwards agrees enthusiastically. His daughter, though not mentioned in most historical accounts, represents security, future, family. A good match would be a blessing. The parson seems like a gift from Providence itself. Over the following weeks, Dr. Ailiff becomes a fixture in the Edwards household. He visits regularly, always bearing small gifts, gloves for Mrs. Edwards, wine for the table. He's learned the art of ingratiation perfectly, this mysterious clergyman. He asks about Talbot's life, listens to stories of his long service to the crown, expresses admiration for the enormous responsibility of guarding England's most sacred objects. The friendship deepens. Trust grows like ivy, wrapping around the stones of the tower itself. The young gentleman is introduced, a nephew of Dr. Ailiff's, or so the story goes. He courts the Edwards' daughter with appropriate decorum. Wedding plans are discussed. The two families grow intertwined, bound by affection and anticipated kinship. But Dr. Ailiff is conducting a very different kind of reconnaissance. Each visit maps the Jewel House more thoroughly. How many guards patrol the area? When do they make their rounds? How sturdy is that metal grille? How quickly could an elderly man summon help if something went wrong? The parson's eyes miss nothing, even as his mouth spins stories and compliments. If cases like this fascinate you, subscribe to the Crime O'Clock, where every mystery has a ticking timeline waiting to be uncovered. Because Thomas Blood, and make no mistake, Dr. Ailiff is Colonel Thomas Blood, one of the most audacious rogues in English history, is not interested in friendship. He's interested in the single greatest heist ever conceived on British soil. And every smile, every gift, Every moment of manufactured warmth is bringing him closer to the treasures that represent the very legitimacy of the English throne. Blood's past reads like a novel of adventure and treachery. Born in Ireland to a prosperous family, he'd sided with Parliament during the English Civil War, fighting against King Charles I. When Cromwell's Commonwealth collapsed and Charles II took the throne in 1660, Blood found himself on the wrong side of history. His lands in Ireland were confiscated. His comfortable life evaporated. He became a man with nothing to lose and everything to prove. He'd already attempted one spectacular crime, a plot to seize Dublin Castle and kidnap the Duke of Ormond, the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. That conspiracy failed, but Blood escaped. Later, he actually succeeded in kidnapping the Duke in London itself, attempting to hang him at Tyburn, only to have his victim escape when the rope broke, and the elderly nobleman fought back with surprising vigor. Blood vanished again, melting into London's underworld like smoke. Now he set his sights on a prize that makes kidnapping a duke seem almost pedestrian. The crown jewels aren't just valuable, they're priceless. They're symbols of divine right, of unbroken monarchy, of England itself. Their theft wouldn't merely be robbery. It would be a strike at the heart of everything the Restoration represents. For a man like Blood, perpetually at war with the established order, it's irresistible. And his plan is working flawlessly. Talbot Edwards trusts him completely. The old keeper now thinks of Dr. Ailiff as a friend, perhaps even family. He has no idea that the warm-hearted parson's studying his morning routines, noting the weight of the metal grill, counting the seconds it takes for guards to respond to sounds in the Martin Tower, is actually calculating the precise choreography of treason. In early May, Blood makes his move. He suggests to Edwards that he'd like to bring some friends to view the jewels, gentlemen from the country, respectable sorts who'd be fascinated by such treasures. Would tomorrow morning be convenient? Say, 7 o'clock, before the usual crowds arrive? Edwards agrees without hesitation. Why wouldn't he? Dr. Ailiff has become one of his closest companions. The date is set. May 9th, 1671. A morning that will echo through history. But as Blood finalizes his preparations, assembling his team of conspirators and checking his weapons one final time, neither he nor Edwards can imagine how spectacularly this friendship built on lies is about to explode into violence, chaos, and one of the most bizarre episodes in the entire history of the British Crown. The trap is set. The players are in position. And tomorrow morning, the impossible is about to become terrifyingly real. Thomas Blood sits in a dimly lit tavern in one of London's less reputable quarters, surrounded by the three men who will help him pull off the impossible. These aren't common thieves plucked from the streets. They're conspirators, men with their own grudges against the crown, their own reasons to risk everything for a share of England's greatest treasures. There's his son, also named Thomas Blood, younger, hungry for glory and gold, willing to follow his father into the jaws of treason itself. Then there's Robert Perrot, called Hunt by the group, a man whose past is as shadowy as Blood's own, someone who understands that audacity succeeds where caution fails. And finally, Richard Halliwell, the Muscle, a man capable of violence when violence becomes necessary. Blood lays out the plan with the precision of a military strategist, which is exactly what he is. He didn't earn his colonel's rank through cowardice. He survived battles, conspiracies, and manhunts. He knows that great crimes require the same discipline as great campaigns. Timing, coordination, the willingness to adapt when chaos inevitably intrudes. The old man trusts me completely, Blood tells them, his voice low beneath the tavern's ambient noise. He'll open the jewel house without question. 7 in the morning, before the tower comes fully alive. We'll have minutes, perhaps 10, perhaps 15 if fortune favors us, before alarm is raised. He describes Talbot Edwards in detail. 77 years old, proud of his position, physically frail despite his robust spirit. He won't surrender the jewels willingly. Blood knows this with certainty. The keeper's honor runs too deep. He'll have to be subdued immediately, silenced before he can cry out. It's the only way. The crown jewels themselves present unique challenges. They're not designed for portability, quite the opposite. They're meant to be displayed, to project power and permanence. The St. Edward's crown, the centerpiece of the collection, weighs nearly 5 pounds of solid gold studded with semi-precious stones. It's bulky, awkward, impossible to conceal under a cloak without significant modification. The sovereign's orb is similarly unwieldy, a hollow golden sphere topped with a jeweled cross. and the scepter stretches 3 feet long, a rod of solid gold that couldn't look more conspicuous if it were on fire. Blood's solution is as brutal as it is practical. They'll destroy the treasures to steal them. The crown will be flattened with a mallet, folded, made small enough to hide beneath a cloak. The orb will be tucked into a bag. The scepter will be sawed in half if necessary, divided between them for easier escape. These aren't art thieves interested in preserving beauty. They're pragmatists interested in survival and profit. The symbolism can be hammered flat. The gold melted down. The jewels pried loose and sold individually across Europe, where no one will ask uncomfortable questions about provenance. Each man will carry weapons, pistols, daggers, the mallet for the crown. They'll dress as gentlemen to avoid suspicion on the approach, but beneath their respectable exteriors, they'll be armed for violence. Blood has no illusions about what might be necessary. If guards intervene, if Edwards proves more resilient than expected, if any variable spins out of control, they must be prepared to fight their way out of the tower itself. The escape route is crucial. They'll have horses waiting outside the tower walls, held by an accomplice whose identity Blood keeps to himself. The moment they exit the Martin Tower with the jewels, they'll move quickly, but not desperately. Running attracts attention, but purposeful walking suggests legitimate business. They'll cross the tower grounds, pass through the gates before anyone realizes what's happened, mount the horses and scatter into London's labyrinthine streets, where even the king's men will lose their trail. Blood drills them on timing. From the moment we enter the jewel house to the moment we're mounted and riding, 12 minutes. No more. Every second beyond that multiplies our danger exponentially. He makes them rehearse their movements, practice the sequence, subdue Edwards, seize the crown and flatten it, grab the orb and scepter, move to the door, check for guards, proceed to the outer courtyard, through the gate, to the horses away. But there's an element Blood can't rehearse, can't plan for with military precision, the human factor. Talbot Edwards isn't just an obstacle to be neutralized. He's a man who considers Dr. Aleph a friend, a man who's opened his home, shared his table, discussed his daughter's marriage prospects with someone he trusts. When Edwards realizes what's happening, the betrayal will hit him like a physical blow. That moment of shock, of comprehension, might give them the extra seconds they need, or it might trigger something unpredictable in the old keeper. Blood pushes the thought aside. Sentiment is a luxury conspirators can't afford. Edwards is simply the final lock between them and the greatest prize in England. He'll survive the encounter. Blood has no particular desire to murder him, but he'll survive it bound, gagged, and robbed of the treasures he spent years protecting. The men discuss contingencies. What if more guards are present than expected? What if Edwards isn't alone? What if the jewels are locked in some secondary container they haven't anticipated? Blood addresses each scenario with the calm of someone who's faced death enough times to no longer fear it. We adapt, he tells them simply. Hesitation kills conspirators faster than guards' bullets. Whatever happens, we move forward. We complete the mission or we die trying. There's poetry in it, really. This collision of meticulous planning and inevitable chaos. Blood has mapped every detail, anticipated every obstacle, crafted a plan that should work flawlessly. But he knows better than most that plans evaporate the moment reality intervenes. The true test isn't in the planning. It's in the execution, in those frantic minutes when everything goes wrong and survival depends on instinct, violence, and sheer audacity. Young Thomas Blood asks about the aftermath. When we've succeeded, when we have the jewels, how do we sell them? The crown will be hunting us. Every port will be watched. How do we convert treasure into safety? His father smiles, an expression that doesn't reach his eyes. Leave that to me. I have contacts on the continent, people who ask no questions when gold crosses their tables. We'll separate the stones from their settings, melt the gold into anonymous bars. Within a month, the crown jewels will cease to exist as recognizable objects. They'll be currency, scattered across a dozen countries, impossible to trace. It's a vision of perfect dissolution, symbols of eternal monarchy reduced to commodities, traded and spent until no trace remains of their royal origins. For Blood, this is perhaps the greatest appeal of all. He's not just stealing wealth. He's erasing meaning, proving that even the most sacred objects are ultimately just metal and stone, vulnerable to anyone bold enough to take them. The meeting concludes with handshakes and final confirmations. Tomorrow morning, they reconvene outside the tower at 6:30. They'll arrive as a group, respectable gentlemen interested in England's treasures, led by the trusted Dr. Aleph. And by 7:30, they'll be riding hard for freedom with flattened crowns and sought scepters in their bags, leaving behind chaos, outrage, and an elderly keeper who'll wait to discover that trust is the most dangerous thing to give a man with nothing left to lose. Blood walks back to his lodgings through London's dark streets, past watchmen calling the hours, past taverns spilling light and noise into the night. Above him, stars wheel in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human ambition. Tomorrow, he'll either achieve immortality or die ignominiously in the attempt. Either way, his name will echo through history. The die is cast. The conspirators are ready. And England, secure in its belief that some things are too sacred to steal, sleeps peacefully through its final night of innocence. May 9th, 1671. Dawn breaks over London with the color of old brass, light filtering through the coal smoke that perpetually hangs over the city like a shroud. The Tower of London emerges from darkness stone by stone, its white towers, its crenellated walls, its gates that have swallowed traitors and kings alike for 600 years. Ravens stir in their roosts, cawing their harsh morning songs. The yeoman warders begin their rounds, boots echoing on ancient cobblestones. It's a morning like 10,000 mornings before it. Except this morning, history is about to crack wide open. At 6:30, 4 men converge near the tower's outer walls. Thomas Blood, still playing his role as the kindly Dr. Aleph, wears his clerical collar and an expression of benign anticipation. His son wears the clothes of a young gentleman, appropriate for someone courting the keeper's daughter. Perrault and Halliwell are dressed respectably but unremarkably, the kind of men you'd pass in the street without a second glance. Beneath their cloaks, they carry the tools of their trade, pistols loaded and primed, daggers in sheaths, a wooden mallet wrapped in cloth to muffle its strikes, a small saw with teeth sharp enough to bite through gold. Blood checks his pocket watch, a gift, ironically, from one of his previous victims. 6:35. They have 25 minutes before Edwards expects them. They use the time to review the plan one final time, speaking in low voices that don't carry beyond their small circle. Every man knows his role. Every man understands what failure means. The gallows at Tyburn, the jeering crowds, the slow strangulation of a traitor's death. But Blood sees only success in his mind's eye. He's visualized this moment for months, refined every detail, eliminated every variable he can control. What remains is simply execution, in every sense of the word. At 6:55, they approach the tower gates. The guards recognize Dr. Aleph immediately. He's become a familiar face these past weeks, the friendly parson who visits the keeper of the crown jewels. They wave him through with barely a glance. His companions merit slightly more scrutiny, but Blood explains smoothly that these are the friends he mentioned, country gentlemen eager to view England's treasures before the day's crowds arrive. The guards see no reason for concern. Everything about the group suggests respectability, from their clothing to their demeanor. They pass through without incident. The walk across the tower grounds feels longer than Blood remembers. Every window seems to hold watching eyes. Every shadow might conceal a suspicious guard, but no alarm sounds. No one challenges them. They reach the Martin Tower, climb the worn stone steps to the jewel house entrance. Blood knocks, 3 measured raps that echo in the morning stillness. Talbot Edwards opens the door with a smile that makes Blood's stomach tighten with something uncomfortably close to guilt. The old keeper is delighted to see his friend, welcomes him and his companions with genuine warmth. Dr. Aleph, prompt as always. And these must be the gentlemen you mentioned. Come in, come in. You've chosen an excellent hour. We'll have the jewels entirely to ourselves. Edwards is dressed for the day, but still has the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who's recently woken. His wife remains upstairs in their apartments. They're alone, exactly as Blood hoped. The keeper leads them through a narrow passage toward the jewel house itself, chatting amiably about the history of the pieces they're about to view, unaware that history is about to be made in the most violent way possible. The jewel house is smaller than Blood's companions expected, a cramped, stuffy room lit by a single window, the crown jewels displayed behind a metal grill that seems almost insulting in its simplicity. But there they are, gleaming in the morning light. The St. Edward's crown with its crosses petit and fleurs de lis, the sovereign's orb topped with its jeweled cross, the scepter with the dove, the scepter with the cross. Centuries of monarchy condensed into a few square feet of metal and precious stones. Edwards approaches the grill, reaches for his keys. This is the moment. Once that grill opens, once Edwards steps inside the enclosure, the point of no return will be crossed. Blood feels his pulse quicken, adrenaline sharpening every sense. He notices the texture of the stone walls, the quality of light, the sound of Edwards's breathing as the old man fumbles with the ancient lock. The grill swings open with a metallic screech. Edward steps inside, still talking, gesturing toward the crown. Now, gentlemen, if you'll observe the craftsmanship. He doesn't finish the sentence. Blood moves with surprising speed for a man in his 50s. He's behind Edwards in 2 strides, one arm winding around the keeper's throat, cutting off the cry before it can form. The old man struggles, stronger than Blood anticipated, fueled by shock and outrage. But Perrault is already there, helping to force Edwards down. They have a cloak ready. They throw it over his head, muffling his attempts to shout, to warn his wife upstairs, to summon the guards he knows are somewhere nearby. Bind him, Blood hisses. Quickly. They have rope prepared. They wrap it around Edwards's arms, his legs, working frantically while the keeper writhes and fights with the desperate strength of a man defending something more precious than his own life. He's not just protecting gold and jewels. He's protecting his honor, his trust, everything he believed about the friendly parson who betrayed him so completely. But Blood can't afford to think about that now. He strikes Edwards once, twice, trying to stun him into submission. The old man's resistance weakens, but doesn't stop. Blood realizes with a spike of panic that they're making too much noise, taking too much time. Every second that passes is a second closer to discovery. Young Thomas Blood is already at the jewels, snatching the crown from its resting place. The mallet comes out, wrapped in cloth but still producing dull, terrible thuds as he brings it down on the crown, flattening the arches, trying to make it small enough to hide. The sound echoes in the tiny room like a death knell. Perrault grabs the orb, stuffs it into a specially prepared bag. Halliwell seizes the scepter, realizes immediately it's too long, too conspicuous. He pulls out the saw, begins cutting frantically at the golden rod. The sound is worse than the mallet, a metallic screech that seems to fill the entire tower. Edwards, still on the floor, somehow gets a hand to the cloak covering his face and tears it aside. His mouth opens. Blood sees it happening as if in slow motion, sees the old man's chest expand, his throat working, preparing to release the scream that will end everything. Treason. Edwards's voice cracks, but carries. Murder. Treason. The single word shatters the morning silence like glass. Somewhere upstairs, Margaret Edwards hears her husband's cry. Somewhere in the tower grounds, guards hear something that makes them pause, turn, begin moving toward the Martin Tower. Blood knows with absolute certainty that everything has just gone catastrophically wrong. Move, he shouts at his men, abandoning all pretense of stealth. Take what we have and move. Young Thomas has the flattened crown under his cloak. Perrault clutches the bag with the orb. Halliwell abandons the half-sawed scepter. There's no time to finish, and they burst from the jewel house into the passage, running now, all plan abandoned in favor of pure desperate flight. Behind them, Edwards is still screaming, his voice growing stronger with each cry. Treason! The crown is stolen. Stop them! They careen down the stairs, into the morning light of the tower grounds. Ahead lies the gate, freedom, the waiting horses. But between them and escape, guards are converging, drawn by Edwards's cries, confused but alert, hands moving to weapons. Blood pulls his pistol, fires a shot into the air, not to kill but to scatter, to create chaos. It works. Guards dive for cover, unsure where the threat is coming from, buying precious seconds. They're running full out now, for men in respectable clothes transformed into fleeing criminals, their deception stripped away, their careful plan reduced to mad scrambling desperation. The crown bounces against young Thomas's chest. The orb clangs in its bag. Behind them, the alarm spreads like wildfire through the ancient fortress. And ahead, the gates are starting to close. Talbot Edwards lies on the cold stone floor of the jewel house, rope biting into his wrists and ankles, blood trickling from a wound on his head where blood struck him. His vision swims, but his mind is crystalline with horror. The crown jewels, his crown jewels, the sacred objects he's sworn to protect with his life, are being carried away by men he welcomed as friends. The betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound. He can hear his wife screaming from upstairs, hear the confusion of guards shouting to each other, trying to understand what's happening. He can hear boots pounding on stone, the chaos spreading through the tower like plague. But he's helpless, bound and bleeding, watching the careful order of his world collapse into nightmare. His daughter's bedroom door flies open. She appears in the passage, drawn by the commotion, and freezes when she sees her father on the floor, the jewel enclosure empty, the metal grill standing open like a violated mouth. For a moment, father and daughter lock eyes across the space, and in that moment, Edward sees his failure reflected back at him. He's not just the keeper who lost the crown jewels. He's the fool who invited the thieves to tea, who trusted a smiling parson with secrets and access, who handed England's greatest treasures to criminals wrapped in friendship. "Get help," he manages to shout, his voice raw. "They're escaping. The crown. They have the crown." She runs, her footsteps fading down the stairs, and Edwards is alone again with his shame and his fury. He works at the ropes, ignoring the pain, driven by something beyond duty. This is personal now. Blood didn't just rob the crown. He robbed Edwards' dignity, his judgment, his sense of himself as a man who could distinguish friend from enemy. That wound won't heal, even if the jewels are recovered. The scar of that betrayal will mark him for whatever years remain. Meanwhile, Blood and his conspirators have made it halfway across the tower grounds. The shot Blood fired has created momentary chaos, but that chaos is already organizing itself into pursuit. Warders are shouting, pointing, moving to block the exits. The massive gates that seemed so close now look impossibly far, and between the thieves and freedom stand men with halberds, pistols, and for centuries of tradition telling them that nothing, absolutely nothing, leaves the tower without permission. "Split up." Blood shouts, but it's too late for tactics. They're committed now, running as a group toward the gate, hoping momentum and confusion will carry them through. Young Thomas clutches the flattened crown, so tightly it cuts into his ribs, through his clothing. He can feel the bent metal, the crushed majesty of something that once sat on a monarch's head, now reduced to contraband. The weight of what they've done hits him in waves, not just theft, but sacrilege, not just crime but an assault on the very idea of England itself. A warder steps into their path, halberd raised. "Stop in the king's name." Perrault doesn't hesitate. His pistol comes up, fires. The shot goes wide, intentionally or not. History doesn't record, but the warder dives aside. They're past him, still running, the gate growing larger with each stride. But behind them, something unexpected is happening. Talbot Edwards, despite his age, despite his wounds, has somehow freed himself from the ropes. Perhaps his captors' haste made them careless. Perhaps desperation gave him strength beyond his years. Whatever the reason, he's on his feet, stumbling from the jewel house, one hand pressed to his bleeding head, the other pointing at the fleeing figures. "The crown." His voice cracks but carries across the grounds. "They have the crown. Stop them. For God's sake, stop them." His appearance galvanizes the guards in a way shouted orders never could. This isn't abstract duty anymore. It's their keeper, bleeding and betrayed, crying out for justice. Men who might have hesitated now move with purpose. The hunt intensifies. Blood sees the gate ahead, sees the guards there turning, understanding finally filtering through their confusion. He sees his escape route closing like a fist, and makes a decision that will define the rest of his life. "Through them," he roars. "Don't stop for anything." They hit the gate at full sprint. A guard reaches for young Thomas, gets a hand on his cloak. The younger Blood spins, breaks free, keeps running. The flattened crown shifts under his clothing, threatening to fall, and he clutches it desperately. To lose it now, after everything, would transform them from bold thieves into pathetic failures. They burst through the gate. Incredibly, impossibly, they're through. And there ahead are the horses, exactly where they should be, held by a wide-eyed accomplice who clearly didn't expect this level of chaos. Blood vaults into the saddle with the grace of a cavalry officer, his age falling away under adrenaline's alchemy. His companions follow, horses dancing nervously at the shouting and confusion. "Ride!" Blood kicks his horse into motion. "Ride like the devil himself is behind us." Because something worse than the devil is behind them. An entire apparatus of royal justice, now fully aroused, understanding finally what has happened within the ancient walls of the tower. The crown jewels, symbol of unbroken monarchy, have been stolen. The impossible has occurred. And every guard, Every warder, every soldier in London will now be hunting for men on horseback carrying flattened gold and crushed majesty. They thunder through the streets of London, mourning shopkeepers diving aside, citizens shouting in alarm. Blood leads them through narrow alleys he's memorized during weeks of preparation, cutting through the city's medieval tangle where pursuers on foot will lose precious time. Behind them, the alarm bells of the tower begin to ring, deep, sonorous notes that carry across the Thames, announcing catastrophe to a city just waking to its daily business. But they've made a critical mistake. In their panic, in the chaos of the escape, they've stayed together instead of scattering. It makes them easier to track, easier to describe. Witnesses can point definitively. From men on horseback, riding east, riding hard, one of them clutching something under his cloak that bulges suspiciously. The pursuit begins to organize. Soldiers mount horses. Warders spread through the streets, asking questions, following the trail of startled citizens. And somewhere in the tower, Talbot Edwards is giving descriptions in a voice tight with pain and rage. An Irish parson who called himself Aleph, his supposed son, 2 accomplices. He remembers every detail now, the careful cultivation of friendship, the questions that seemed innocent but were actually reconnaissance, the way Blood's eyes had lingered on the jewels during every visit. "I'll know him anywhere," Edwards tells the captain of the guard, his hand still pressed to his bleeding head. Every word he spoke was a lie. Every smile was calculation. "Find him. Bring him back. I want to watch him hang." The words are spoken with such venom that even the hardened soldiers in the room feel a chill. This isn't just a keeper demanding justice for theft. This is a man who trusted and was betrayed, whose entire understanding of human nature has been violated along with his charge. He won't rest until blood pays for both crimes. If cases like this fascinate you, subscribe to the Crime O'Clock, where every mystery has a ticking timeline waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, Blood and his men are discovering that stealing the crown jewels was only half the challenge. The other half, escaping London with every soldier, constable, and citizen now alert to their presence, might prove impossible. The city is a trap closing around them, and they're riding deeper into its jaws with every stride. The crown under young Thomas's cloak feels heavier with each passing moment, weighing him down not just physically but spiritually, a stolen symbol of something larger than mere wealth. They make it to Irongate, near the edge of the city, before their luck finally runs out. A captain named Martin Beckman, returning from duty with a contingent of soldiers, sees 4 men on exhausted horses, riding too fast, looking too desperate. Something in their behavior triggers his instincts. He orders them to stop. Blood's response is instantaneous. He spurs his horse forward, trying to break through. But these aren't tower warders confused by sudden chaos. These are trained soldiers with fresh horses and loaded weapons. They spread out, cutting off escape routes, encircling the thieves with practiced efficiency. "Surrender in the king's name." Beckman's voice cuts through the morning air. For one eternal moment, Blood considers fighting. His hand moves to his pistol. He survived impossible situations before, escaped when capture seemed certain. Why not once more? Why not ride into legend on a wave of gunpowder and defiance? But then he sees the soldiers' weapons trained on his son, sees the mathematical certainty of death in their positioning, and something in him breaks. Not his courage, that remains intact, but his willingness to sacrifice his boy for a crown that's already crushed beyond recognition. "Hold!" he shouts to his companions. Then to Beckman, "We yield." The soldiers close in, weapons ready, and hands reach to pull Blood from his saddle. He doesn't resist. As his feet hit the ground, as soldiers search him and his companions, as the flattened crown is pulled from young Thomas's cloak and held up like a trophy, Blood allows himself one bitter smile. They caught him. Against all odds, despite his perfect plan, they caught him red-handed with the crown jewels. He should be dead within a week, dancing on Tyburn's gallows, while crowds jeer and London celebrates the capture of the most audacious thief in English history. But Colonel Thomas Blood has one final card to play, one so unexpected, so unprecedented, that even he isn't entirely sure it will work. As they bind his hands and prepare to march him back to the tower, back to the scene of his crime, back to face Talbot Edwards's rage and England's justice, Blood begins calculating his most desperate gambit yet. He's going to demand an audience with the king. The Tower of London has held countless prisoners in its long, blood-soaked history. Kings and queens, nobles and commoners, traitors and martyrs, all have passed through its gates in chains, most never to emerge alive. Now Colonel Thomas Blood joins their ranks, locked in a cell that has witnessed centuries of despair, waiting to learn whether he'll die as spectacularly as he dared to live. The reaction to his capture ripples through London like an earthquake. News spreads through taverns and marketplaces, coffee houses and court chambers. The crown jewels were stolen, actually stolen, by a man who'd befriended their keeper and walked into the tower as casually as visiting a neighbor. The audacity of it stuns the city. The fact that he nearly succeeded terrifies it. If the crown jewels could be taken, what else might be vulnerable? What other sacred certainties might prove fragile under pressure? Talbot Edwards has become a tragic figure overnight. Some whisper that he was complicit, that no thief could have gained such access without inside help. Others, more charitable, see him as a victim of spectacular deception, an honorable man exploited by a master manipulator. Either way, his reputation is shattered along with the crown blood flattened. He visits Blood Cell once, stands outside the bars looking at the man who called himself Dr. Aleph, who drank wine at his table and discussed his daughter's future. "You destroyed me," Edward says quietly, his head still bandaged from Blood's blows. "Even if they hang you tomorrow, you've destroyed me." Blood looks at him with something that might be regret, might be calculation. "I needed access. You provided it. It was never personal." "Everything is personal," Edwards replies, his voice breaking. "Every lie you told, every smile you gave, those were pieces of my life you stole along with the crown. At least the crown can be recovered." He turns and walks away, leaving Blood alone with whatever conscience he possesses. The encounter clearly affects Blood more than he expects. He's faced death before, betrayed allies, survived impossible odds, but Edwards's quiet devastation reminds him that some costs can't be calculated in gold or measured in glory. The old keeper will carry this wound for the rest of his life, and no amount of Blood's eventual fate will heal it. But Blood isn't done surprising England. From his cell, he sends a message that shocks his captors. He demands an audience with King Charles II himself, not with magistrates or prosecutors, not with the Tower's authorities, with the king. The request is so preposterous that it's initially dismissed as the desperate fantasy of a condemned man. No common criminal demands audiences with monarchs. The social gulf is too vast, the precedent too dangerous. But Blood insists with a calm certainty that makes his captors uneasy. "Tell His Majesty that Colonel Thomas Blood has information that might interest him. Tell him I'll speak only to him, personally, without intermediaries. Tell him," and here Blood pauses for effect, "that I attempted this theft not for personal gain, but to make a point about the vulnerability of the crown's most sacred symbols." It's a magnificent bluff if it's a bluff. The claim transforms common theft into political theater, suggests layers of meaning beyond mere criminality. And somehow, impossibly, the message reaches King Charles II, and somehow, even more impossibly, the king agrees to the meeting. Charles II is one of England's most fascinating monarchs, a man restored to the throne after years of exile, pragmatic where his father was rigid, witty where Charles I was humorless. He survived civil war, exile, poverty, and the constant scheming of enemies foreign and domestic. He's also genuinely curious about this Irish rogue, who almost pulled off the impossible. What kind of man attempts to steal the crown jewels? What could he possibly say that would interest a king? The meeting takes place in Whitehall Palace, under heavy guard, with Blood brought from the Tower in chains. Court observers gather, expecting to witness a king's fury, perhaps even a summary execution. What they witness instead becomes one of the most bizarre episodes in the entire Stuart dynasty. Charles receives Blood in a private chamber, orders the guards to step back, though not so far they can't intervene if violence erupts. The two men face each other across an enormous gulf of rank and circumstance. On one side, a king by divine right, ruler of England, Scotland, and Ireland, descendant of generations of monarchs. On the other, a penniless Irish rebel who just tried to steal his crown. "So," Charles says, leaning back in his chair with the casual grace that defines his reign, "you wanted to speak with me. Speak." Blood doesn't grovel. He doesn't beg for mercy or protest his innocence. Instead, he does something utterly unexpected. He tells the truth, or his version of it. He speaks of his service during the Civil War, fighting for Parliament when he believed the cause was just. He describes losing everything when the monarchy was restored, watching his lands confiscated, his family impoverished, his loyalty to the Commonwealth rewarded with ruin. "I became nothing," Blood says, his Irish accent thickening with emotion. A man who'd fought for what he believed was right, punished for being on the losing side of history. "Your Majesty restored England to order. I don't dispute that. But you also created men like me. Men with nothing left to lose. Men with skills and grievances, and nowhere to direct them except against the order that destroyed them." Charles listens without interrupting, his famous dark eyes revealing nothing. Blood continues, describing the Dublin Castle plot, the kidnapping of the Duke of Ormond, building toward the crown jewels theft. He doesn't justify it exactly, but he contextualizes it, transforms it from crime into rebellion, from greed into protest. "I wanted to prove," Blood says, his voice dropping to something almost confessional, "that even your most sacred symbols are vulnerable. That all your power, all your divine right, all your restored monarchy rests on foundations more fragile than you believe." The crown jewels sat behind a metal grill guarded by an elderly man. "I walked in and took them. If I could do that, what else might be possible?" It's a dangerous argument, essentially admitting to sedition while standing before the king he attempted to symbolically dethrone. But there's something in Blood's directness, his refusal to dissemble or beg, that captures Charles's interest. The king has spent his life surrounded by sycophants and plotters, people who tell him what they think he wants to hear. Blood is offering something different, honest rebellion, audacity without apology. "You flattened my crown with a mallet," Charles observes, his tone unreadable. "I did, Your Majesty." "You traumatized an elderly keeper who trusted you." "I did that as well." "You attempted to strike at the very heart of English monarchy." Blood meets the king's eyes directly. "I did, and I failed. And now I'm here, in your power, waiting to see whether you'll send me to Tyburn or Charles leans forward, genuinely curious. "Or whether you'll recognize that I'm more valuable to you alive than dead." The chamber falls silent. Even the guards shift uncomfortably, uncertain whether they've just witnessed treason compounded or some strange form of negotiation. Blood has just propositioned a king, suggested his own usefulness to the man whose crown he tried to steal. The sheer audacity of it is breathtaking. What's your take on this case? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to the Crime O'Clock, because the next mystery is already ticking. Charles studies Blood for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughs. Not a mocking laugh, but something genuine, appreciative of the absurdity and boldness of the situation. "You have courage, Colonel Blood. Suicidal courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Tell me, what makes you valuable to me?" Blood sees his opening and takes it. He speaks of his connections in the Irish underground, his knowledge of Republican networks still operating in England, his understanding of how rebellions are organized and plotted. He offers to become an informant, a spy, a bridge between the crown and the disaffected elements that still threaten Charles's reign. It's not altruism, it's survival, but it's also pragmatic in a way that appeals to Charles's own pragmatism. "I know these people because I am these people," Blood says. "I know how they think, where they meet, who funds them, what they're planning. You can hang me and make an example that will satisfy London for a week. Or you can use me and prevent the next plot before it begins." The argument is compelling, though others in the room look horrified at the suggestion. Pardon the man who stole the crown jewels? It's unprecedented. It undermines the entire basis of royal authority. It suggests that audacity and charm can override law and tradition. But Charles II has never been a conventional monarch. He survived exile by being flexible, by understanding that pragmatism sometimes trumps principle. And there's something else, a recognition of kinship, perhaps, between two men who've lived by their wits in hostile worlds, who understand that survival sometimes requires bending rules that others consider sacred. The king rises from his chair. The room holds its breath. Blood remains kneeling, head bowed, waiting for the verdict that will either kill him or transform him into one of history's most improbable survivors. "Colonel Blood," Charles says formally, "you have committed crimes that should send you to the gallows. You betrayed trust, committed violence, and attempted to steal objects sacred to this realm. By all rights and laws, you should die for what you've done." Blood doesn't move, doesn't speak. This is the moment. Everything balances on the king's next words. "However," Charles continues, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I find your audacity oddly refreshing. I pardon you for your crimes. Moreover, I restore your Irish estates and grant you a pension of £500 per year. You will serve the crown as you've promised, and perhaps in serving it, you'll do more good than your hanging would achieve." The chamber erupts. Courtiers gasp, protest, argue. "This is madness," they insist. "This undermines everything." But Charles waves them to silence with royal authority that brooks no argument. His decision is made, and in Stuart England, the king's word is absolute. Blood rises slowly, chains clinking, hardly believing what he's just heard. He's been pardoned. More than pardoned, rewarded. The man who flattened the king's crown will now receive a pension from the king's treasury. It's so absurd, so utterly unprecedented, that it seems like some elaborate dream. But it's real. Within days, Blood is released from the Tower, his estates restored, his pension secured. Talbot Edwards, still recovering from his wounds, hears the news and feels something in him break permanently. The man who destroyed him has been forgiven, elevated, turned into a pensioner of the very crown he tried to steal. There's no justice in it, no sense, only the arbitrary power of kings to overturn every expectation of law and order. London reacts with a mixture of outrage and fascination. Ballads are written about Blood's audacity and the king's mercy. Pamphlets debate whether Charles is brilliantly pragmatic or dangerously weak. The crown jewels themselves are recovered, repaired, restored to their place behind a now much more substantial security system. The objects survive, but their mystique has been damaged. Everyone knows now that they're not untouchable, not beyond the reach of a clever man with courage and a mallet. Blood lives another 9 years as a controversial figure, celebrated by some as a romantic rogue, despised by others as an unpunished criminal. He does provide the crown with intelligence, though history debates how valuable it actually was. Perhaps Charles pardoned him simply because the king enjoyed the audacity of it, the way it demonstrated that even monarchy could be flexible, unexpected, human. When Blood dies in 1680, rumors immediately spread that he's faked his death, escaped again into legend. His body is exhumed to prove his mortality, a final indignity for a man who spent his life defying convention. But even in death, his story refuses to die. He becomes the thief who stole the crown jewels and lived to tell about it, the rogue who charmed a king, the man who proved that sometimes audacity and luck matter more than law and order. Talbot Edwards never recovers from the betrayal. He dies in 1674, his reputation permanently stained by the man who called himself Dr. Aleph and drank wine at his table while planning treason. His daughter's marriage, the supposed reason for Blood's visits, never takes place. The entire friendship was fiction, every word a lie constructed to facilitate one of history's most audacious crimes. And the crown jewels? They still sit in the Tower of London, now behind elaborate security that Blood's theft made necessary. Millions of tourists view them each year, often hearing the story of the Irish colonel who almost got away with the impossible. The objects themselves are the same, gold and jewels, symbols of monarchy, treasures beyond price. But they're also different now, marked forever by the morning when they were flattened, hidden, almost lost, before being recovered and restored. The story asks questions that echo across centuries. What makes something sacred? Is it the object itself, or our collective agreement to treat it as untouchable? When audacity meets authority, which should triumph? And what does it say about power that a king could pardon a man who tried to steal his crown, turning enemy into ally with a simple royal decree? These questions remain unanswered, suspended in history like the crown jewels themselves, glittering, provocative, impossible to fully understand. Colonel Thomas Blood dared the impossible, failed, survived, and became immortal. His story reminds us that sometimes the greatest crimes produce the strangest consequences, and that human nature, with all its contradictions, its capacity for both betrayal and mercy, remains the most unpredictable force in history. The crown was flattened but restored, the thief was captured but pardoned, and the Tower of London, ancient witness to so much human drama, keeps its secret still, waiting for the next audacious soul to test the boundaries of what's possible.